does me taking this next action, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an email, answering an email, is this going to bring me closer to one of these goals? And if the answer is no, you have to have selective ignorance. And this is what I do in order to be effective. I have a half dozen businesses, hundreds of employees, but you have to be able to selectively ignore large chunks of data hitting you all day and not becoming reactive. You have to stay focused.
I study the patterns of the universe.
Masters to the brain.
Virtual your mind. Talking about your life, fundamental principles,
philosophy.
What is and what is not true.
Those who know themselves.
Being better every single day.
Hello there. Welcome to another episode of the Think Grow podcast, where personal development meets real life. I'm your host, Ruben Chavez, and I explore a variety of topics with thought leaders, artists, entrepreneurs, and other interesting people to bring you different perspectives that you can use to enrich your mind and improve your life in whatever way you see fit. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Steve Mehr. Steve is the chairman of Jacoby and Meyers, which is one of the largest consumer law firms in the U.S. He's also the CEO of WebShark 360, which is a full-service media agency that caters to professionals. If that's not enough, Steve's also an avid real estate investor with around $100 million worth of transactions under his belt. But more importantly than any of that, Steve is a father and a husband with a beautiful family that I've actually had the privilege of meeting. And despite all of his various ventures, he somehow makes it all work. And we talk about how he makes it work in our conversation. Something that's also worth noting is that Steve is someone who I've been fortunate enough to consider a mentor of mine for several years now. Steve and I initially connected through Instagram, funny enough, and over time developed a real-life friendship, which I've been very grateful for. So in our conversation, we cover topics such as how Steve structures his day for maximum effectiveness. We talk about the difference between being productive and being effective. We talk about how to attract a mentor and cultivate that kind of a relationship. I asked Steve what advice he would give to his younger self. And we also talk about one of the main foundational beliefs that he has that's been responsible for much of his success. A quick note, even though you're hearing this as the 6th episode, it was actually the 2nd interview episode that I ever recorded for this podcast. So if the sound quality is subpar, it's because I made some technical mistakes that I've since fixed. So thank you for bearing with me there. You can connect with Steve on Instagram at Steve Mehr. That's SteveMehr. And now I will let you get to listening. Here's Steve Mehr. Steve.
How's it going, Ruben?
Good. Thank you for being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I'm excited to talk with you because, there are a few people in my life who I met through this little thing called Instagram, and you are one of them. Kind of wanted to, before we get into your background and all your success, how we met and kind of how that unfolded. So I think it was 2014 at this point, right, that we met?
Yeah, I think so. I was actually one of your followers.
That's right. So this was when I started Think Grow Prosper. I must have had maybe 5,000 followers, 10,000 followers. I don't know.
Yeah, it was close to the beginning.
Yeah, and you reached out to me. I forgot exactly what you said, but the sentiment was something like, hey, I like what you're doing. And eventually I received a message that was like, hey, we should collaborate somehow. And I don't think I've ever asked this of you. Is there anything like specific that caught your eye about me? Like, why did you reach out to me and connect?
I just felt like at that time, the stuff being posted on Instagram was a lot of meals and people's dogs and people's lifestyle. And, I had started an account where I was giving advice, sometimes through quotes and sometimes just through captions and imagery. And I felt like there wasn't a lot of that going on. And when I found your account, I was like, hey, this is the power of positive thinking and a lot of things that I already believed in. So I thought it was really cool. So I just wanted to reach out to you and say, hey, man, this is you're doing some good stuff over there and keep it up. And, obviously we became friends over the years and had a mutual business together, and the relationship kept growing. So all in all, it was a really good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've valued our relationship. I mean, you've been somewhat of a mentor to me. I don't know if you know how, my position in life when we met. I mean, I was, I just quit a job and I was very kind of a little down and out, right? And so it was a pivotal point really meeting you, I think, because, I was doing some work that I really liked. I didn't even view it as work at the time, but it was building this Instagram account, and that somehow attracted someone who had really accomplished a lot into my life. And that was a pivotal point, I think, because, well, for a variety of reasons, right? Power of association. But anyway, I just wanted to tell you that, man, because you have kind of guided me in a variety of directions, taught me a few lessons along the way. And I think I want to unpack some of those with you today here for our listeners. One of those is mentorship. And I know you're, a big proponent of mentorship, being a mentor, getting a mentor. I've seen you work with my peers and people who I've seen come up and do great things. You take time out of your day to be a mentor. Why is that important to you?
Just in general, growing up, it was, difficult. Come from an immigrant family. So I feel like, a lot of times you have a lot of really smart people or people that are willing to do the work and they just don't have direction. And that's something that I felt many times in my own life. All it takes is someone to either throw you some scraps or put you, like a missile, just point you in the right direction. Because unless, you have some clarity of purpose, which most people don't have, it's really difficult. You're just kind of swimming against the current, feeling like you don't get anywhere. And, I've learned over the years that obviously I wasn't the only person who felt that way. And sometimes just sharing my experiences and trying to help people get on, a path to success and kind of, showing them the broader vision of how you can live your life and how to live a purposeful and a successful life and how you can impact others. And I think it just goes a long way. And for me, it's something that's, to be honest, I'm a little bit addicted to doing it. I've helped and do help, a lot of people for, a variety of reasons. And 99% of the time, it's obviously there's no monetary benefit, but I feel like there's a societal benefit and there's satisfaction you get when, it's like having little children, right? So when you see somebody grow in their life, it makes you, feel good and be appreciative. And, especially in this world where everybody's out for themselves, I was lost for so many years. Someone threw me some scraps in my early 20s and, I realized how far it got me and what it meant to me, even though they probably didn't know what they were doing. And it was through my own hard work that brought those opportunities. But, I just realized with just, a little bit of direction and a little bit of opportunity, a lot of people can achieve great things.
So I actually want to take a bit of a step back here because, you mentioned when you were first starting out, someone, threw you a little bit of a scrap. Can you kind of give us some context for your, career trajectory and how did you start? What were your first projects? How did that evolve? And then what do you do now?
Okay. Well, I started off as a teenager selling speakers and audio equipment in high school to the rich kids. It actually started off with $90 of Christmas money. And I bought a pair of 6x9-inch pile speakers for $90. And I sold them for $150 for the pair. And I was like, okay, I was always trying to figure out how to make money because, while I grew up in a very comfortable environment, I also knew early on my parents couldn't provide the type of life I wanted. And every time I had, as a kid, when you have $20 in your pocket, you feel like you're on top of the world. You could do anything. So, that's just kind of how I started out. And that led me to open, a small retail store. I was an early adapter to selling electronic goods on eBay while everybody else was selling Beanie Babies and baseball cards. And just kind of developed a knack for marketing. Obviously the first 4 or 5 years, I felt like I was going in circles, and it was really hard. And there was a lot of moments where I thought I was going to go out of business, or I wasn't going to be able to, make ends meet. Probably for the first 8 years, that's how my life was. Extremely high stress, 7 days a week, working. But then, once you figure out your formula and you work hard enough, and this is what I always tell people I mentor as well. If you work hard enough, the right people and the right opportunities will be drawn to you. So I think, for me, it was just about, when my vendors and my, colleagues saw that, hey, this kid's working 7 days a week. He's just an animal. He doesn't take any time off. That when an opportunity comes by that might not be right for them, they will throw it to you because they want to see, everybody wants to see somebody hardworking, succeed. So I think, that was kind of step one. And, and through that eventually turned into, distributing electronics. And I had, brands like Sony and, other, household names, and eventually that business, ended up making me a millionaire at age 26. But during that time, I made a promise to my parents that I'd stick with school, and that was a difficult promise to keep, but I did keep it. I went to night school. I went to night law school eventually, got my law degree. And I kind of saw the trends in consumer electronics where margins were shrinking on a daily basis, and I just saw an opening to exit the business. So, sold the business off and decided at that point to get into law and real estate. So, and to this day, I'm still in law and real estate. I'm, the chairman of one of the largest consumer law firms in the country, Jacoby and Meyers. If you live on the West Coast or the East Coast, you've probably heard of it. And, right now I mentor a lot of young lawyers and help a lot of people start their practices because, at the end of the day, law is, a very customer service oriented, business. And you have an opportunity to make a lot of impact. So I think, having that opportunity to make impact every day is something that drives me. I jump out of bed every day. I'm like, hey, I can make a lot of impact in people's lives. And kept, on the side, kept my, real estate investments going. And, I've done, I don't know, maybe $50 to $100 million plus in, real estate transactions. And throughout the trajectory, I was always intrigued and obsessed with different business models. So I've invested in all sorts of businesses and helped all sorts of businesses get off the ground. And started a media company, started an advertising agency. I'm one of the owners of LA Weekly, which is, one of the, I think it's the second largest publication in Southern California. And, and the list goes on and on. And a lot of people over the years told me, hey, write a book. And I was like, no one wants to hear what I say. And even if I do say what I really want to say, I don't think they'll understand it, because before you can understand, I feel like the concepts of how to be successful and how to live, a life of purpose, you need to understand very, very, very basic principles of like goal management and, having a clear purpose at whatever phase you are in life. And also understanding that changes, in your 20s, it might be one thing, in your 30s, something else, 40s, something else, 50, something else. So, I guess, personally, I became kind of also a study of like human psychology and sales and all sorts of stuff. But, so when I did put out a book, it wasn't really even a book. It was just more like an ebook, a short 20-minute read. And it had to do with goal setting and managing your goals. So, I think if people could take away anything from today, I'd like them to start thinking about, just the principles of effective goal setting and how to create, a systemic way that you could achieve whatever it is in life, and whether it's a health goal, a professional goal, family goal, whatever it is.
Yeah, I know you're a big proponent of that, and you have a really cohesive philosophy when it comes to that. I want to dive into that. Before that, I kind of want to unpack a little bit a few things from your bio there. I mean, you obviously have varied career. I think you're on your, fourth career at this point. But within those careers, even there have been multiple ventures. And I mean, I just think that's so interesting because, most people only have one or two kind of career trajectories. And you've had a lot. Entrepreneurship is in your DNA. You started out when you were really young. I think your first venture was selling shoelaces. Or was it speakers or shoe?
No, I was like 10 years old and I would sell shoelaces with different sports team on it. So I would go actually to the junior high and high school games when I was in like fourth grade, the basketball and football games. And I would sell shoelaces that had professional basketball teams and football teams on it for, $1 a lace. But, to be 10 years old and make $60 in a week, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's awesome. And I guess I want to dive into a little bit about what you think the common themes are within the different ventures that you've engaged in, and maybe even not the common themes, but kind of what drives you and what kind of compels you to start all these different things in so many different areas. I mean, you've been a lawyer, you've been an entrepreneur, like you do real estate, and so kind of what are the common themes and or what drives you to do these things?
I think part of it is as you work harder and harder and you create your habits, part of it for me is I just can't have a lot of downtime. And the minute I get a business off the ground, I try to figure out how do I remove myself from this business? How do I put in the people and whether it's the culture or the processes that the business could live on its own.
I mean, you started really early, right? You started. I mean, I don't know if you've ever worked for someone else.
I haven't.
You haven't? Okay. So you just decided early on that you wanted to be an entrepreneur. I mean, is that just genetics, or was there kind of a formative experience that happened that you're like,
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of experiences. And, for me, it was always about more important than anything was the freedom. I don't like being told what to do. I personally don't understand how people can work 40 years, but, with someone telling them what to do. It's just, to me, like, that's just not something I was going to sign up for. What society tells you to do and be. So, I mean, I guess you could say I had a real problem with authority, whether it was, my parents or school or whatever it was. And I learned early on that I equated making money with freedom. If I got $60 in my pocket, I could pick what I want to eat for dinner. I can pick if I'm going to go to the movies that weekend, as opposed to, letting life happen to me. I took a very proactive approach to, letting me happen in life, letting me, putting the decisions back on my table. So I think, from like a core psychology perspective, I mean, it was just the concept of I equated money with freedom. And at this point, I equate, setting up my businesses and my lifestyle with freedom, not particularly money, because, after you achieve a certain amount of success, it kind of, doesn't matter as much. The extra incremental dollars don't make as big of a difference, but being able to create and develop businesses that play into the type of lifestyle you want to have, the type of freedom you want to have, it's really important. I have 2 young sons, and I like to take a lot of vacations and really spend one-on-one time with them. A lot of my friends are like, we take vacations to get away from our kids. You're the only one that plans month-long vacations to just, literally, be with them 24/7. But to me, I get a lot of joy in that. And that gives me an opportunity to, I feel like, share my knowledge, mentor them, get them to open up, because, at the end of the day, when they come home from school, they're not going to really open up to you. Or, on a Saturday, you're going to barely scratch the surface. So I feel like when you spend these extended periods of time with people, you get them to actually open up. And for me, it's really important to be that person in my kids' lives.
Yeah, and I've had the privilege of meeting your kids and your wife, going over to your house. I know that you have built a pretty balanced life, and I know it wasn't always that way, but part of that is how you've set up your business, and I think part of that also is how you approach your work. And I kind of want to get into that a little bit. And I know that you have a very well-defined philosophy when it comes to, approaching your work and approaching your work day and just structuring your tasks in such a way that you're always working on those important things. Can you talk a little bit about, that concept?
Yeah. I mean, initially it started down with obsessively writing down, my daily goals, and then also writing down my short goals and my long-term goals. And I would literally do this every night, even though I already had it written down from the day before. I would refine it and knock things off that I dealt with and replace them. So I think part of it is being obsessive about what your actual goals are. And I think a lot of people mistake being productive with being effective. You have to be effective in life. Being productive means I got to the office, I answered emails all day, responded to my voicemail, I met with a couple clients, I made a couple sales, and you know what? Hey, I had a pretty productive day. But that's how most people think, which is absolutely wrong. I mean, you have to be effective in your day. You have to obsessively focus on high leverage critical tasks. What does that mean? Tasks that bring you closer to those goals that you're obsessing about. Tasks that have the maximum amount of impact on helping you achieve whatever you're doing, whether it's professionally or personally. So, a lot of how my life is set up, and now I don't write them down anymore, and it's more intuitive to me, is because, I did it for, dozens of years, writing down, obsessively daily, monthly, and long-term goals. A lot of it is being very robotic in saying, does me taking this next action, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an email, answering an email, is this going to bring me closer to one of these goals? And if the answer is no, you have to have selective ignorance. You have to ignore, and this is what I do in order to be effective. I have a half dozen businesses, hundreds of employees, among the businesses. And, I have everything from, shampoo company to newspapers to, very, very large law firms that, as you can imagine, are extreme emotional and time drain. But you have to be able to selectively ignore large chunks of data hitting you all day and not becoming reactive. You have to stay focused. So in my life, I don't respond to every email. I read them, I scan it, but I don't respond to it. I don't respond to most people's texts. Sometimes I'll get texts throughout the week, and all of a sudden I'll create a block, a 1 hour block, and I'll send out 100, 150 texts because I'm only responding to mission critical and high leverage things throughout the day. I don't let myself become reactive throughout my day. I'm proactive throughout the day. I wake up, I know my goal that day. I know what I have to get done that day. So, excuse my language, but fuck everyone and everything else that's going to try to distract me from that. I don't allow that to happen. And I think as you become more and more effective in your day, and as you develop these habits and as they become more intuitive to you, all of a sudden I can do things in a day that most people might not be able to achieve in a month because they're swimming against the current, going in circles, being reactive. I probably only respond to 1% of emails. I just don't. Just because someone is reaching out to you, it doesn't always solicit a response. That is just the horrible waste of time. So, people have to get that guilt out of their head. They think by saying no to people, they're being aggressive towards them, or they're, somehow turning people off. But, it's actually the opposite. It's you're creating an opportunity to say yes to your high leverage tasks. You're creating an opportunity to say yes to your critical tasks that'll help you move forward in life. And obviously you have to balance not being offensive, by no means am I offensive,
Right.
And there's certain delicate situations that do elicit a response, even though I'm like, I'd like to ignore it, but I have to, politically give a response. But, but in general, that's probably my competitive advantage over most other people, is that I can quickly cut through what matters and what doesn't matter. And that only comes with experience and trying, right? And I could quickly obsess about what's a critical task, and I'm going to spend my days working on critical tasks. And then that way, you ignore everything else. And at some point, everything needs a response. If you're an entrepreneur, or even if you're not, if you run a family or whatever it is, everything needs some input eventually. But if you could put it off and create a half day or create a day, whether it's a Saturday or whatever it is, to then get caught up and deal with all those issues, imagine how much you got done that Monday through Friday because you weren't reactive.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you always talk about how you get everything done before you go on vacation. Miraculously, somehow,
right,
it works. And that's because you prioritize the mission critical tasks. And so it's basically, so the basic structure is you have to have a long-term or medium-term kind of overarching goal, right? Kind of a big picture thing. And then the way you structure your day is that you focus on the 1 to 2, I don't know, maybe 3 things that are mission critical for that goal. Is that the basic structure?
Yes. So I wake up and I say, for each of my businesses, what is the number one most important thing that I have to get done today? Just one. And then if that gets achieved, I immediately know what the second one is. But I don't create a situation where, I walk in and all of a sudden I'm dealing with everybody's problems. Those problems are going to be there 24/7 anyways. Obviously if it's a problem that has to deal with, liability or something that has to have my attention, that's a different story, which happens all the time as well. But, I think in general, people hold themselves out to be more important than they are. And I think, if you could focus on, the most important things that have to get done that day. And, in the past when I was younger, I would have what has to get done from a short-term basis, the most critical thing I can do, and what has to get done on a long-term basis. And sometimes the long-term basis ones you can't knock out in a day and you have to work at it for a week or 3 weeks or a month. But you just have to think in very binary terms.
Right. So yeah, I've noticed that if I don't write something down, it just does not get done. And I know you're kind of past that point. You're more intuitive about it, but literally, I actually forgot about this. Sometimes, there's things that I forget about that work for me that I stopped doing for some reason. And it's the most frustrating thing. This was a few months ago when I just forgot to write things down. And I was like, I'll just wing it. I know what I'm going to do today. And it was 2 months into it. I didn't even realize why I was so depressed and felt directionless. And Vanessa was like, I thought you typically write down what you do at the beginning of the day or the day before. And I go, damn it, that's what's missing. And so for me, it's such a game changer. We have Vanessa and I have kind of monthly editorial calendar meetings. And so we'll schedule a bunch of stuff, mission critical stuff for the month. But then I'll do it the day before. And I'll just schedule out kind of the 1 or 2 things that I need to get done the next day to move me forward. And man, it is such a game changer. Just that writing down of it. I mean, I think for people who maybe are just starting that practice, writing down is such it's a game changer. So, and I don't think, tell me if this is accurate, but obviously you're an entrepreneur and it works in that space, but I think this is a kind of an approach or a strategy that is helpful for whatever you do. Even if you're an employee or freelancer or whatever it is that you do, I think prioritizing and figuring out how to prioritize those kind of tasks will make you more effective in whatever space you're in.
This applies to every aspect of life. It's just not, usually I talk professionally just because that's what most people are interested in talking about, but absolutely, on a personal basis, this applies to everything. So, from raising your children to having a meaningful and effective relationship with your spouse. I mean, you have to be able to be effective, not productive. You have to, be able to understand, what's mission critical, and you have to ignore all the noise and work towards achieving, those things.
Just a side note. So you mentioned that, you ask yourself, is this going to get me closer to my goal? And if not, then you ignore it. Is that the only kind of question that is useful for determining what's important in the first place? Or are there other frameworks or other questions you ask yourself to determine what's important? Because I think part of the problem is sometimes people, maybe they have a goal, but maybe they don't know exactly what is the most important thing. So is there more to that, or is that pretty much the direction you want to go?
I mean, here's the thing. I mean, if you have like clarity in what your goal is, and let's say it's to lose 20 pounds or it's to save $5,000 for a car, you have to be able to say no to relationships that are holding you back from those goals. And that's really hard. So a lot of people, this is why I say you have to be almost like a computer or binary. Like, you can't be overly emotional because it'll hold you back. And then what's going to happen? A year from now, you didn't save your money. You didn't lose your weight. You didn't do all these things. And it's going to be, more of the same old shit, right? So you have to be able to say, let's say no to, friends and relationships that are holding you back. If you have a group of friends you go out drinking with and there's always a $100 bar tab, or there's, they want to do these extravagant things, that's not in line with you saving the $5,000 to buy a car. So you have to learn to say no. And I think, a lot of people don't know how to effectively say no. And you also have to learn to say no to unimportant activities. So when I was working, I'd wanted nothing more than to go on a date with a girl when I was in my young, early 20s, to go on a date with a girl on a Friday night, or go even see my parents on a Friday night. But if there was an opportunity to make a little extra money, if there was an opportunity to improve my business somehow, that's the decision I made, and trust me, like after 5, 6, 10 years, are your friends annoyed with you? Is your family annoyed with you? Yes. But, you also see people's true colors. I still have amazing childhood friends. And, and today what I could do for my parents and, the vacations and the type of free time and things that we do together, experience-based things that we do together are, all of that is only because I did say no for so long. I did build my businesses. I did achieve a certain amount of success. So now I can, provide things that, most people wouldn't be able to provide. So I think in general, people need to learn how to say no to any activity that's not in alignment with whatever their goal is, whether, like I said, it's professional, personal. You have to realize that saying no is okay. And you have to learn to respect yourself. You have to learn to respect your time. And you have to be okay with and not be shy about giving yourself a chance to follow your dreams, giving yourself a chance to achieve your goals. You can't be a people pleaser. And for me, that was, it was hard. And it took, a lot of the concepts I talk about, I talk about them as if they're so easy, but a lot of these things took me years and years of creating good habits and reinforcing good habits for it to become second nature.
Yeah. I think that's an important point. I think that's partly why I love writing things down, is because it just reminds you, even if you're not intuitive about it yet, it just reminds you, and then you can kind of build that habit. So that's important. I want to switch gears here just a little bit and kind of talk about who are some of your mentors that kind of helped you along the way when you were first starting out, say, or even later, and how did you develop those relationships?
To this day, I still have a lot of mentors, and I feel very strongly about, as we talked about earlier, mentoring people, but also, being mentored myself. I feel like self-improvement and living a successful life, it's a lifelong journey, and it's something you commit yourself to, right? It's not, it never ends. I feel like if you're truly dedicated to living a successful life, you'll never get to that point where you're like, hey, I'm pretty successful right now, whether it's, personally, professionally, health, whatever. So it's one of those things you kind of have to be a student of life. And the best way to learn is from people who have experience in those areas. So, and that's why mentorship is so critical. And I always recommend, people get a mentor that's a little bit ahead of them. Sometimes people are like, oh man, if I had, whatever, Bill Gates as a mentor, my life would be so different. And I say, no, it wouldn't. And the reason is he's so far removed from your situation, he can't possibly give you the type of advice you would need to move quickly to the next level. So I always tell people that I mentor, try to find someone who's only 2 to 3 years, maybe 4 years ahead of you on that curve. So if you're a freshman in college, try to find a senior or someone who just graduated. If you're starting out, with a business, go to the guy on the corner with the local bakery or the local liquor store and try to get him to mentor you. You don't want the CEO of a Fortune 500 company mentoring you. How is he going to help you the day, the week or the month or the first year you start in business? So a lot of mentoring is also, being self-aware and understanding exactly, what you would need. And a lot of times what happens with these mentors, at least in my case, a lot of the people that mentored me, I'm now mentoring, years later because I became a lot more successful than them. But a lot of it had to do with being open-minded and saying, look, I'm going to learn as much as I can from this person. I'm going to try not to be a burden on them. I try to create a template that, I meet with them once or twice a month and pick their brain and have them challenge my ideas. And you develop a lot of lifelong relationships as well. So, I've had, at any one time, I probably have 5 or 6 mentors, and these people have changed over time. So my first mentor obviously was my father. He was an immigrant. I saw him work really hard. And when I'd look at him, I'd say, I have no excuse. If this guy can come here, doesn't exactly have a command of the English language. We moved to Orange County, first LA, then Orange County in the early 80s, and, very, very white area. And, my father is Persian, and, he never made an excuse. He made out there and made it happen. We lived in a house. I had toys. I had everything I wanted. And he provided an amazing, good life. And from an inspirational figure, he was my first mentor, and I would always go to him. But as soon as I got into business, even the vendors and reps who were selling me things, I tried to pick their brain on all sorts of things. And you always have to try to add value. So a lot of times, getting a mentor, you kind of have to prove yourself. You have to prove that you're going to add value to somebody's life in order for them to give the opportunity to you to be able to mentor you. So, it's not always that easy finding a mentor, but I also feel like it's not that difficult because people want to help. If you had someone call you right now and say, hey, Ruben, man, I'm struggling with, this issue, and I know you're a little bit ahead of me. Can you give me some pointers and tips? I don't see a scenario where you would say no. Most people genuinely want to help other people. What kind of, excuse my language, asshole doesn't want to? And those are the people you want to avoid anyways. So, I think finding a mentor is not that hard, but trying to create the right relationship is a little bit more difficult, and you have to be thoughtful about it.
What's one way to do that? Because you mentioned that, you want to prove that you're worth that person's time, prove that you're doing good work. And what's one way to kind of maybe show that or reach out, or one kind of tactical strategy for that?
I think that, most mentorship doesn't start with a conversation about, hey, do you want to be my mentor? It just doesn't start that way. It usually starts over lunch or a cup of coffee or whatever the situation is. And I think, it's somebody that you respect. And at the end of the conversation, you could say, I don't want to be a burden on you, but is it okay if I email you once a month or call you once a month for 5 or 10 minutes and pick your brain? I think you could really help me get some clarity on some items that I've been struggling with in life. And I think most people would say yes to that. It's I know I don't personally give out my cell phone number very often, but I give out my email to a ton of people, right? So I have a ton of people emailing me every month, just asking me questions. But going back to, I'm not reactive. I'll usually set aside an hour or 2 hours, at a time that's convenient for me on a weekend, and I'll, respond to them. But yeah, so and through that process of developing that relationship, just letting the person know you respect them and respect their time. So you can't be a bully about the situation. I've had people that I've tried to lightly mentor a little bit, and all of a sudden, they want to call you 10 times a day. They want to text you for life decision that they're making. It's like, that's not what would be convenient for me. So then you get turned off, and you end up avoiding that person. So, and I think you need to let them know that you look at them like a great uncle or like a grandparent, and and you got to develop that type of a relationship.
So on that note, you've built a great life for yourself. You've been very successful in business and in other areas. What advice, like knowing what you know now and having the perspective that you have now as a mentor, say, what advice would you give your younger self who was, say, just starting out? Maybe the younger self where you just graduated high school, or older. Is there any specific piece of advice that you can look back now and be like, oh yeah, that would have kind of cut a few years off, or oh, that would have made life a lot less stressful for me? Anything along those lines?
I think that one of those pieces of advice would be to believe in yourself more. I mean, I always believed in myself a lot. That's why I moved out the day I turned 18 and opened a business. So, but I still would say believe in yourself more. I don't think it doesn't matter how much you believe in yourself. You can always believe in yourself more. You could always think a little bit bigger. So I think, it's scary when you're first starting out in anything, whether it's a new relationship or a business or whatever the landscape for your life is. It's scary, but I think, there's been billions of people that have come before you, and all of them somehow made it to old age. And it's one of those things that, like, you just have to believe in, who you are as a person a little bit more. So I think that would have been important to me. The other thing would have been learning quicker what the traits of successful people are. For me, it was a lifelong process because, I'm 41 right now. And when I was 20 years old, I had AOL, and it was, I want to say $65 an hour. The internet there was no Google. There was, I think even at that point, there was no Yahoo. It just, was something new. And the type of information you can get today is unbelievable. Back then, you actually had to read real books cover to cover, and that's a very slow process. And it's expensive. It's an expensive proposition. So I think learning practical skills and learning emotional intelligence at a younger age for me would have made me much more successful. So and today, when I do have an opportunity to mentor high school kids or even early aged college kids, I tell them, you have to master practical skills. I don't care if you're in school for computer engineering or if you're in school for whatever, to become a doctor. I want you to work at night and weekends at Best Buy doing sales, because I want you to learn how to read people. I want you to learn how to overcome objections, very basic practical things that most people can't deal with. When you go to school, they don't even teach you how to finagle a raise for yourself. They don't teach you anything, money management, anything. So I feel like learning those practical skills. And what are practical skills? I mean, a lot of it are basically, things around emotional intelligence, basically how to think and live with or without your degree. It doesn't matter. How to be like, a good human, how to read people, how to understand a little bit of like human psychology, how to manage how people perceive you, perception management. I mean, there's a lot of things that fall under emotional intelligence. And I feel like if I could do it over again, I would have probably spent a few more years learning and trying to master more of those skills, because as later in life, I realized those were the skills that propelled me. It wasn't the degrees or whatever it was. It's having those emotional, that emotional intelligence mastery is what's propelled me forward.
Yeah, it's like you learn the most important things outside of school often, right? I mean, you learn the basic things in school, and then you learn the real education starts once you get in the battleground of life, which is really interesting. And I know you did go to school, and that was kind of, I mean, not forced upon you, I guess, but it was something that wasn't your initial inclination.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go to college, and so I moved out the day I turned 18, and I was making some money, selling the electronics. And I learned early on that no one will lease space to you if you're an 18-year-old kid with no credit. So at that point, I had to go back to my father and ask him if he would co-sign on a lease, because I didn't have any credit. And it was a shitty dump. It was like, I think it was 780 square feet, like $1,000 a month in rent. And basically he's like, we really wanted you to go to college. I will only do this if you promise that you stick with your education. He's like, I don't care if it's night. I don't care if it's weekends. I don't care if it takes you 10 years. here's the deal. If you want to use my credit, if you want me to sign off on this, you're going to go to school. And I made the deal, man, and I'm a man of my word. So I stuck with it as much as I didn't want to. It was something that I stuck with. And in retrospect, I'm glad I did. So, I've learned, I became a millionaire without my education, but having my education, I've learned that a lot more doors and opportunities open for you if you do have an education. But I'm also one of the few people that could tell you, you absolutely don't need the education if you have practical skills. And if you have a high level of emotional intelligence, you'll be successful at whatever you do. And you kind of touched on this earlier. You're saying, Steve, I think you're on your 5th career, and that's absolutely right. And the reason I can transition from one area to a different area and be involved in all these different businesses is because I have those practical skills. I have a high level understanding and self-awareness of what it takes to be successful in general. So it's kind of created a scenario where it's less important for me as far as, what industry or profession I'm in. And it's allowed me to flourish in very diverse and different things.
That's good advice. I wanted to kind of explore some advice maybe for those who are entrepreneurially inclined maybe, or they are thinking about starting their own venture or doing something, kind of venturing out on their own. For those people, or even creatives, right, who want to do some freelancing, that type of work. I know that you've had a lot of big businesses. You've also had some small ventures, but I'm curious to know what your view is on just starting out. Specifically, I know this about you, that your current, or one of your current projects is, WebShark 360, you're a media agency, but the seed for that came about when you were doing something else. You had a law firm, I believe, and you kind of noticed that, one of your big budget line item expenses was, media buys, and that budget, caught your attention, and so you kind of started to do that in-house, if I'm not mistaken, and in a sense, kind of validating a business, because you started small, and then you had other professionals in your network to kind of, who kind of came out of the woodwork and said, hey, can you do this for me? But this was just something you were doing for yourself. I'm curious, is that kind of a strategy that you use consciously to start, like first starting out in an industry?
Yeah, absolutely. You always have to start small, and you always have to validate your, idea and your concept. And the fastest path to going broke is thinking that you have to start at scale in order to be successful. So that's the farthest thing from the truth. And you're right. So one of my biggest line items was advertising spend to drive new business. And I realized every ad agency was somehow, I felt like I was getting screwed. So I said, you know what? I could figure this out. I'm a smart guy, and I'll put enough brain power on it to figure it out. So I hired a couple professionals in that space, and went through a couple people to find the right team, and really became a study of, digital marketing and online marketing. And through that achieved, helped my own business achieve, a much larger level of success. And that drove a lot of people, a lot of people around me were like, hey, how did you scale your business? How did you do this? And I said, well, hey, I could bring you on as well as a client. And through that, I got more consulting gigs, got tied into bigger businesses, saw how, larger operations were operating, and kind of took away something from each of the operations and built it into my own operation, and kept my own operation growing. And, and it's, but yeah, it all started off really small. It was me and one developer trying to figure out the Rubik's Cube. And it just, that's just how even when I started my first law firm, it was me and one paralegal. And we're a far cry from that today. We're operating in, I want to say, eight or nine different states and well over 100 staff. So
that's awesome. Speaking of starting small and kind of along those same lines, keeping expenses low, I know that even when you started to do really well in business and had a lot of cash flow, I know that, you tell the story, you still, drove kind of a clunker, and you didn't, you hadn't bought a house yet, even though you could afford it. This idea of kind of living below your means is something that I'm a huge fan of, and has enabled Vanessa and I to live very well. Even when maybe the money isn't coming in like you expected. And so, is living below your means, is that kind of a principle that has served you well, and has that been a common thread throughout your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that this comes back to practical skills, all the shit they don't teach you in school, right?
Mm-hmm,
so,
yeah.
And for me, living below my means was initially, not something I wanted to do, obviously. It was more or less had to do with survival of my business, because you had to have reserves in the business, and it didn't matter how much money the business brought in. You just couldn't take it out of the business and spend it. I needed more inventory. I needed this. So on paper, I was, what you could consider rich. I remember I was in my early 20s and I had a couple $1 million worth of inventory on my shelves, but, I was also driving a, $289 a month Toyota Highlander. And, I was, sharing an apartment with a friend so I could save another $700 a month. So it's kind of one of those things that, initially it was, I didn't have as much choice. I was just trying to be responsible, right? So because I wanted my business to be sustainable, I had essentially, cut myself off and, moved out, and, I didn't have anybody I could really lean on. So, over time, when you live that way, you realize that is the right way to live, so it's kind of in the hierarchy of things, for me is, I need to always have adequate reserves for the business. I've been many times I was in a situation where, how am I going to make payroll? Well, at this level, you can't have those kind of thoughts, right? So you need to make sure you have proper reserves. And when you make money, you got to have different buckets you put it in. And that's just, for me, that worked really well. So I had a bucket for, saving up for a house, saving up for a car. And even though I could stretch myself beyond that bucket to make something happen, I was very disciplined. And this is where having habits comes into play. I was just, I think I actually recently posted this on my Instagram, and it was, you don't determine whether you have a successful life or not. It's your habits that determine whether or not you have a successful life. So I think developing good habits early on is key, and having self-control, having discipline is key. Too many people are destructive. Too many people destroy their own lives at their own hands. And a lot of it comes down to not having good structure and habits. Knowing me, you'll know that I'm also a very unstructured person. I'm very loosey-goosey in general with my calendar, my days. But at the same time, from a big picture perspective, I'm also very structured. And then also working on your mindset to be more self-aware, understanding that you have to make peace with your past. Everybody has a million excuses, from whether it was growing up or relationships they've been in, on why they could justify not getting somewhere in life. And it's just kind of one of those things, you have to forgive yourself. You have to understand that, especially if you're young, this is just the beginning of your journey, and you're going to make dozens more massive mistakes. And, every high achiever I know, every, millionaire and billionaire I know, they forgive themselves, and they don't go around beating themselves up for, all the mistakes that they've done in life. So I think being able to move forward and get over whatever obstacles, mental obstacles that you have in your life is very important. Even to this day, I have some business partners that are still, they're looking in the rearview mirror, man. They're just wishing so many things were different in life. So I think part of living a successful life is being self-aware to the point that you can make peace with your past so it doesn't screw up your today and your tomorrow. And you can just focus on moving forward in life. So, in general, I've learned there's a couple types of people, and one of them are people who live in the past, and one of them are people who look forward to tomorrow. And you have to, and it's not easy, but you have to train yourself to look forward to tomorrow.
So I want to be respectful of your time here, but I also just want to get in a couple rapid fire questions here for you.
Let's do it.
Okay. So what's something you believe, either, let's say, about yourself or the world, that has enabled you to succeed?
Explain that.
Any belief you have, let's say, it could be anything from, maybe something a belief you developed early on, or a belief that you developed along the way later in your career that is kind of maybe a framework for how you view the world or how you view yourself that hasn't kind of enabled you to succeed?
Absolutely. I don't give a shit what people think about me. And I think that it's one of the most invigorating and powerful tools you can have. And what does that mean? That means that frees me to not have bullshit relationships with people. That frees me that if I'm networking or if I'm in business with someone and someone doesn't like me, even if I really want them to, I don't give a fuck. Even if they're good for my business, I don't give a fuck. The reason is if you don't mesh well with somebody, then you shouldn't have them around you anyways. So because of this attitude, what it's done is it's created a group of people around me that I genuinely enjoy and I like. And I'm assuming it's a mutual, respect, and you don't carry these artificial relationships. So, being able to be comfortable with yourself to get to that point, I think is a huge advantage in life. So whether you're, chasing a spouse or you're chasing a deal or a business partner or just with friendships in general. So I'm okay with people not liking me. I understand that if I meet 10 people, 3 of them are going to probably say I'm an asshole, and another 2 won't like me because of the color of my shirt or maybe the color of my skin. And I'm okay with that. I don't even give it 2 seconds thought. I focus on the other 5 people. And being able to kind of go through these type of issues in your life quickly and effectively is really important. And I think that's a huge thing that I would like to see more people do.
Awesome. So another question I have is, you can answer this however you see fit, but I think a lot of people have this idea that, let me step back. I think a lot of people look at your lifestyle and your story and the success that you've created, both financially and otherwise in your life, and they say to themselves, like, I'm not going to be happy until I get there, until I've made it. And they kind of, in a sense, put their lives on hold. You've created your definition of success. My question to you is, do you feel like you've made it, or do you feel as though you still have more to do?
I definitely don't feel that I've made it. Now, that being said, I mean, I'm not ungrateful, and I understand by a lot of measures, I have made it, but I'm also self-aware enough to know that, what is made it, there's so many lives I could continue to impact. There's so many people I can continue to mentor and change their lives. So, I mean, there's just so much, I feel like there's just so much work to be done. Right. So,
right.
I don't know. So yeah, I mean, have I made it maybe from a, lifestyle standpoint? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but have I made it from maybe a, making an impact standpoint? I don't think so. I'm not even close to scratching the surface. And, so it's kind of one of these things that, it's a lifelong journey of both self-improvement and, pushing yourself to continue to achieve. And it is exhausting sometimes, and I'm unmotivated sometimes, just like everybody else, but it's one of those things that you just have to keep pushing.
Yeah. It's kind of like, it seems that once you get to the next level in whatever, life, your career, your relationships, you kind of see how good it can be. And then you can kind of see the next level beyond that. And then, so you have new goals, you develop new goals. And so I think that it's kind of an ever evolving journey, and there's no specific point in time where you're like, oh, done. I made it. My life is good. It's like, just because you make it, quote unquote, in one area doesn't mean all your problems go away.
No, I mean, I have just as many problems as anyone else. I can guarantee you that. So that's just, that's a myth. And, and I know people who I consider very successful, and if you talk to them that, they still don't consider themselves very successful. So, it's, I think if you're the type of person that gets somewhere and you're like, okay, I made it, I'm done, then you probably got lucky or didn't deserve it in the first place, because the mindset it takes to get there, once you're there, it's just kind of like a moving goal, which is exhausting, but it's okay. And that's where self-awareness and self-improvement and being kind of like a lifelong student comes into play to, make sure that you're living a fulfilling life, make sure that you're living a life of purpose, and make sure that you, at that point, can work on trying to impact as many people as possible. And, yeah.
I love it. Well, lastly, man, I wanted to ask you, what are you currently working on? What are your current projects? And also, where can people find you?
Well, you could follow me on Instagram on @SteveMeher. It's SteveMehr. And that's really the only, heavy social I do. We're going to be relaunching the site, stevemehr.com soon. And, God forbid one of your listeners is involved with a catastrophic personal injury or a wrongful death type situation, they can always, reach out to me and I'll personally help them. And I kind of love the field of law. Every day I get up and I'm, blessed to be able to fight for people who don't always have a voice, and for people who, but for our participation in their case and in their life, the defendants, the large corporate defendants or the large insurance companies would just mow them over. So, we recently had a $10 million jury verdict on a case that the insurance company was only offering us $26,000. That doesn't happen every day. And, and I'm proud of my team to be able to bring home results like that on an annual basis. This is, it's something that happens on a somewhat routine basis in our firm compared to other firms. So, I think, bringing my hustle and way I like to dominate things to this field right now, it's a lot of fun, and we're helping a lot of people, and it's something that, I love doing at this point. And then, obviously growing more media companies and getting more and more into publications and things like that is something else that's from my creative side. I'm very interested in it, and it gives me a creative outlet, and I love it.
That's awesome. What's the best way for people to reach out to you on the legal side of things?
I can give you.
We can put a link. We can put a link or email address in the show notes that accompany this episode.
Yeah. Go ahead and do that.
Okay, perfect.
I'll get it over to you. I appreciate that. And for people that don't know, me and Ruben, we're co-founders of this account, which we're no longer the administrator of it, but we had a healthy little business for a couple years between us, and and I appreciate you, and I've learned a lot from you as well, Ruben, and that's just kind of I've always looked up to you, and I think what you've done with your life and the type of life you've built in the 5 years I've known you it's inspirational to a lot of people.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. It means a lot. On that note, I think we'll wrap up, man. Thank you so much for doing this. It was awesome to talk with you in such a formal setting. We need to not let this be the next time we catch up.
Next time over margaritas, my friend.
Sounds good. Thanks, Steve.
All right. Take care of yourself, Ruben.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Think Grow podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and find value in this podcast, I humbly ask you to please subscribe or leave me a review on iTunes. Or you can just share it with a friend who you think might find value in it. If you've already done any of these, I want to take a moment to sincerely thank you. I truly, truly appreciate your support. Lastly, if you have any suggestions for future guests or topics you'd like to hear covered, you can email podcast@thinkgrowprosper.org.